Guten Tag, APUSH. We have a new video today. It's the bee's knees by the big cheese himself, Mr. Linegar. Let's make history today as we jaw over Unit 6, Day 1. But first, let's do our daily punishment. My ex-wife still misses me, but her aim is starting to improve. Oh, ex-wife jokes. Key terms for today are the Treaty of Paris, 1898. We've had a couple of those Treaty of Parises. The Foraker Act, the Teller Amendment, Insular Cases, the Platt Amendment, Emilio Aguinaldo, Open Door Note, Queen Liliuokalani, Social Darwinism, Alfred Thayer Mahan, the Rough Riders, the Great White Fleet, TR, the Root Takahira Agreement, Big Stick Diplomacy and Gunboat Diplomacy, pretty synonymous. The Clayton-Bulwer Treaty, the Hay-Buenaventura Treaty, the Hay-Pauncefote Treaty, the Gentlemen's Agreement, the Roosevelt Corollary, Sanford Dole, the USS Maine, the Anti-Imperialist League, George Washington Goethals, Yellow Journalism, and Jingoism. We're going to go over the effects and causes of the Spanish-American War, diplomacy style under Theodore Roosevelt, and foreign policies with Japan and China under TR. So let's talk a little bit about imperialist stirrings. Imperialism is when you take over a country, you exert control over them politically, economically, or culturally. And America will be doing all of those things. One of the ideologies to influence America during this time is social Darwinism. Social Darwinism bastardizes the idea of Charles Darwin's natural selection. It says Earth belongs to the strongest and most fit. So it's they use this as European and American countries will use this as a kind of a racial way to justify taking over Africa and Asia and other countries that they don't deserve to because they're the strongest and most fit race. Alfred Thayer Mahan is going to heavily influence American foreign policy. He wrote a book, The Importance of Naval Sea Power Upon the World, and it said whoever controlled the sea controlled the world. This is going to heavily influence Theodore Roosevelt. America, after the Civil War, really starting in the 1880s, 1890s, is ready to go to war over small issues, very nationalistic. That's called jingoism. America is going to enforce the Monroe Doctrine in the first time. This was over a dispute between Venezuela and Great Britain. This was when Harrison was president, I believe. Remember, the Monroe Doctrine says Europe could no longer interfere in the Americas, but before this time, America was not strong enough to enforce it. America is going to step in and work out a settlement, so this is the first time we try to enforce the Monroe Doctrine. Here's a political cartoon of American imperialism. Let's talk about Hawaii. Missionaries come to Hawaii to teach Christianity, British people, Americans. A lot of American businesses are going to move to Hawaii and create sugar plantations and fruit plantations. One of the major business people in Hawaii, his name was Sanford Dole. You've probably bought bananas and fruit before, and it says Dole. Like, he's the one that created that whole fruit company. Since he was in a foreign country, Hawaii, he had to pay high tariffs. So he wanted to make Hawaii part of America so he didn't have to pay tariffs. So he's going to lead a quote-unquote independence movement in Hawaii, even though the Hawaiians don't want to be part of America. But he's going to arm some Americans and some mercenaries. He's going to strip Queen Liliuokalani. She was trying to keep Hawaii independent, but she will be overthrown. Sanford Dole will become the first president of Hawaii. He'll ask that America makes Hawaii part of the United States, but it's not going to happen at first under Cleveland because he was an anti-imperialist. One of the other big problems during this time was Cuba. American tariffs on sugar hurt Cuban sugar production. Spain was the one that was in control of Cuba, and Spain was misruling Cuba. One of the major general in Cuba was General Weyler. He was known as the Butcher. He would put rebels in concentration camps. And And there's actually some really bad pictures of it. Some people starved. He would put them in concentration camps so they wouldn't be able to go to the villages and like hide there. But obviously concentration camps are always horrible. One of the things that led to tension between America and Spain was the Spanish ambassador wrote a letter called the De Lome letter. And he compared the President William McKinley, to a chocolate eclair. It's really soft and like creamy. It has no backbone. He's just basically saying that McKinley is a wuss. And we opened the letter. We found out about the letter somehow. I think we opened the letter, and then we published it. So that outraged Americans. How dare you call our president a pastry product? Dun, dun, dun. The big thing that is going to cause the Spanish-American War is an American ship was in the Cuban harbor by Havana. This was the USS Maine. It was sent to Cuba to calm things down. It's going to explode in the harbor. A lot of Americans, especially a lot of newspapers, will immediately blame the Spanish for blowing up our ship. There was no evidence the Spanish blew up our ship. In the 1990s, they actually excavated the ship, and they found out that the reason it blew up was the boiler got overheated and it blew up. But we're going to use this as an excuse to go to war with Spain. The U.S. will blame Spain. And it was an accident. Here's an effect of the reconcentration camps. There's General Whaler. Oh, God. So, not good. Like I said before, yellow journalism, which uses sensationalism, is going to heavily influence and cause the Spanish-American War. Joseph Pulitzer, William Randolph Hearst were two of the big newspaper owners, and they're both going to push for war. They're going to use like hyperbolic titles and try to get the Americans to support the war. Hearst is going to send the artist Frederick Remington to Cuba. He said to him, "You furnish the pictures, I'll furnish the war," which really shows how he felt about the truth. There will be some people that will try to oppose America getting involved in the Spanish-American War, and they really kind of didn't fit one political ideology. They were all different groups of people. Andrew Carnegie, Jane Addams, John Dewey, who was a philosopher, Samuel Gompers, who was a Union member, and Mark Twain. And they will form an organization to try to prevent America from getting involved in the Spanish-American War, which will not be successful, ultimately. Right before the Spanish-American War begins, the United States Congress will issue an amendment called the Teller Amendment, and it says that if we went to war with Spain, we would give Cuba their freedom, because, we're a democracy. We're just doing this out of the kindness of our heart. Here's an example of yellow journalism. Destruction of warship Maine was the work of an enemy. So, McKinley will finally decide to go to war with Spain. Congress will authorize it. The U.S. will send the Navy to the Philippines. They'll defeat the Spanish in the Battle of Manila Bay. There'll be no American troops invading Manila. They'll work with the Filipinos. The Filipinos were already rebelling against the Spanish. The Filipino rebellion leader was Emilio Aguinaldo. We'll promise that if he helps us fight the Spanish, we'll give the Philippines independence. We will not follow through on that. In 1898, McKinley will annex Hawaii. Hawaii will become a territory. One of the most famous army group of soldiers was the Rough Riders. They were led by Colonel Leonard Wood, and TR was probably the most famous person there, Theodore Roosevelt. He was the undersecretary for the Navy, but he's going to resign and join the Army during the war, and he's going to fight a fierce battle, the Rough Riders will, in the Battle of San Juan Hill in Cuba. The Spanish-American War was a very short war. Only 400 men died of fighting, 5,000 of disease. Splendid little war is what it was called. And here's a picture of the Rough Riders right here. They kind of look pretty awesome, honestly. There's TR. He's pretty awesome, except for an imperialist. So, in the Treaty of Paris, 1898, America will gain Guam. They'll gain Puerto Rico. They'll gain the Philippines. And Cuba will be given independence. If you remember, in the Teller Amendment, we promised Cuba that they would be able to be independent. But now we kind of regret that, so we just fought a war. We want to keep Cuba. So the United States Congress will pass the Platt Amendment that says America could basically interfere with Cuba whenever they want. They could build a naval base there, and if we don't like the government, we could change it. So we've kind of gone back on the Teller Amendment. There was a couple of interesting situations that were happening with Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico will become a territory over America, and it still is today. But there were some Supreme Court cases called the Insular cases that the question was, if it's a territory, do the people that live in Puerto Rico have the same constitutional rights as normal American citizens? The Supreme Court in the Insular cases is going to say that constitutional protection, the U.S. Constitution, does not necessarily apply to any territories we just took over. So it's going to rule against, like, the Puerto Ricans get automatic citizenship rights. The Foraker Act was passed under McKinley. It created a civilian government in Puerto Rico. Nowadays, the Puerto Ricans do have full citizenship rights, except they don't have to pay income taxes. And like their votes don't count in electoral college. I don't think they have members of Congress. So let's talk about the Philippines. The Philippines, America promised Emilio Aguinaldo that we would let the Philippines be independent, but after the war, we're going to decide that the Filipinos weren't ready for independence, super condescending and patronizing. So the Filipinos, led by Emilio Aguinaldo, are going to rebel against the United States. This is going to be a bloody revolution. Between 300,000 to 5 million people are going to die. A lot of them are women and children. America will use reconcentration camps against the Filipinos. We'll capture Emilio Aguinaldo in 1901. And America will keep the Philippines as a territory. We'll keep some bases into the Philippines. And the Philippines will not be given their independence until after World War II. This shows some of the fighting and some of the deaths. Honestly, like what the United States did in the Philippines was really, really bad. America is going to want to get more involved in China. European countries in the 1880s, 1890s have divided up China economically. So like northern China belonged to Britain and only they could trade with them. That was called spheres of influence. And that northern China was just an example. America didn't want that because they didn't have a little part of the Chinese pie. So they wanted to get rid of spheres of influence so America could just trade with any part of China. Not because they were against imperialism, but because they didn't have any of it. So they're going to, under Theodore Roosevelt, his Secretary of State, Hayes, is going to pass he's going to write a note called the Open Door Policy. That's going to say that there should be no spheres of influence. There should be free trade in China. China did not like how Europe and the United States were getting more involved with their country. So they're going to have an anti-foreign rebellion called the Boxer Rebellion that was just trying to basically kill all foreigners in 1900. After this, the Americans and European countries will send an army in China to crush it. The Open Door Note was meant to respect territorial integrity of China and its commercial integrity. It was really a way for America wanting to do free trade in China. This shows where the spheres of influence were. As you can see, America didn't have a sphere of influence. So that's one of the big reasons we want to have the open door policy. So in the election of 1900, McKinley's going to switch vice presidents, and he's going to put Theodore Roosevelt as his vice president. He was the former Undersecretary of Navy, a war hero. McKinley's going to run under his 2 Ps, prosperity and protection tariffs. In 1901, McKinley will be assassinated, and this means Theodore Roosevelt will become the youngest president in 42. He was a wealthy New Yorker. He went to Harvard. He had illnesses all throughout his whole life. When he was a little kid, his dad would give him whiskey to try to calm him up. He had the really, really bad asthma. He learned boxing to kind of strengthen himself. He was a cowboy in the Dakotas for a while. He was an intellectual. He published books on American history. One of his big slogans for foreign policy will be based off an African proverb: speak softly, but carry a big stick. Ask nicely, try to use diplomacy, but if a country doesn't react nicely, then be ready to beat them down and get what you want. There's Theodore Roosevelt during his cowboy days. And yeah, McKinley won the election of 1900. So now TR is president. McKinley's been assassinated. So let's talk about some of the things that Theodore Roosevelt is going to do. America decides they want an isthmus canal connecting the Atlantic through the Pacific Ocean. They want to build the canal in Colombia. Colombia owned a piece of land, which was now modern-day Panama. Colombia would not let America build the canal. So America is going to give weapons to Panamanians who are revolting against Colombia, and they're going to then send their fleet in to stop Colombia from sending troops to end the rebellion. This is speak softly, but carry a big stick. TR asked first nicely, "Can you let us build the canal?" And they said, "No." And he's like, "Okay, I'm going to arm rebels, and I'm going to prevent you from reconquering your territory, and you're just going to lose all this land." However, if you remember from a couple units ago, America had already signed a treaty with Britain in the Clayton-Bulwer Treaty, saying that neither America or Britain would build a canal. So under TR, first he'll get America and Britain to sign a treaty, the Hay-Pauncefote, that America can build a canal in Panama. And then after he helps support the Panamanian Revolution, he'll sign a treaty. America will sign a treaty with the new country of Panama that America can now build a canal in Panama. The person that's going to be in charge of building the canal is Colonel George Washington Goethals. And this is going to just save a lot of room, a lot of thing. You can now just go through here, boop, instead of having to circumnavigate South America. Let's talk about some more things my boy Theodore Roosevelt did. He's going to add a corollary to the Monroe Doctrine. A corollary means like an addendum or an appendix. And what the TR corollary says, that in an event of financial problems, America would intervene in Latin America. We would help them out whether they want it or not. We would loan them money. And then, of course, they would owe us, and we could get more involved in their affairs. A lot of the Latin American countries do not want this. This is going to make us like the international police force in Latin America. It's going to make a lot of the Latin Americans really resent the United States. It's sometimes called the bad neighbor policy. In 1904 and 1905, Russia goes to war with Japan. This is the first war really between a European and a non-European nation. Japan's going to ask Theodore Roosevelt to intervene. He's going to get Japan and Russia to sign a peace treaty in Portsmouth, Connecticut. He's going to receive a Nobel Peace Prize with this, and which is really ironic because he's probably one of the most warlike presidents we've ever had. But this will hurt American relationships with Russia because they felt like it was too favorable towards Japan, even though Japan dominated Russia in this war. This is some of the battles in the Russo-Japanese War. All right, let's talk about Japan and Japan's relationship with the United States. Japanese people are going to come to America to work in sugarcane fields in California. A lot of the white people in California did not like this, so they tried to create segregated schools. So it wasn't just the South that was racist. Chinese, Japanese, and Korean students would be sent to different schools. The big difference here is Japan is a world power. Japan had modernized after Matthew Perry came and threatened to attack them. We talked about Matthew Perry before. Matthew Perry came to Japan and threatened to attack them unless they opened up trade with America. After that, Japan's going to modernize and industrialize. So when the United States, even though it's a local school board, the San Francisco, when they start to segregate Asian students, this upsets the Japanese because they feel like they're a superior first world nation. This is going to lead to the Gentleman's Agreement between Theodore Roosevelt and the Japanese foreign diplomat. America will agree to stop the segregation, and in return, Japan will agree to prevent as much immigration to the United States. So that will kind of stop the problem. This will improve relationships between America and Japan. Later on, America and Japan would sign the Takahira Agreement, which both countries promised to respect each other's territories. They both shared a lot of land close to each other in the Pacific. One of the big things that TR is going to do, he wants to build a modern Navy that shows America's strength. America is now a first world power. So he's going to build a new Navy called the Great White Fleet. And he's actually going to send that Great White Fleet on a voyage all through the Pacific. This is an example of his big stick diplomacy. He was going around Pacific countries to ask for treaties of friendship, but he was going around with his new BA Navy. So like there's an underlying threat. Another name for TR diplomacy was gunboat diplomacy, and it was just the idea that the Americans would use force to get what they wanted against foreign countries. Here's a picture of the Great White Fleet. Look at those beauties. Oh, and here's his big step diplomacy. Uh-oh. All right, kiddos, that's all I have for today. Until next time, deuces, 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 yeah!